They thought she was an easy target. In a crowded school hallway reeking of ego and cheap power, a group of bullies called the police on Talia Monroe, a quiet black girl whose only crime was refusing to bow her head. They laughed as the cuffs snapped shut, confident their lies would bury her. But the moment the officer reported her name, the entire school froze, because Talia wasn't just any girl, she was Judge Monroe's daughter, and they had just declared war on the wrong family. The bell for third period had barely stopped ringing when Talia Monroe stepped into hallway A for the very first time. The corridor stretched out like a tunnel of noise, lockers slamming, sneakers scuffing, laughter ricocheting from wall to wall. But the moment she appeared, the sound didn't disappear. It shifted, conversations stumbled, whispers broke mid-sentence. 100 faces turned in a slow, synchronized ripple, the kind that made a newcomer feel like she had wandered into the wrong ecosystem. The red metal lockers lining the hall gleamed under the fluorescent lights, casting a cold, glossy reflection. They almost looked like rows of silent witnesses, watching, waiting. Talia kept walking. Her dark curls framed a face that wasn't trying to impress anyone, and her stride, steady, centered, didn't match the nervous energy of a girl on her first week at a new school. She didn't shrink. She didn't scan for a safe corner. She simply walked as if the space belonged to her, even if every glare said otherwise, and that alone was enough to irritate someone like Brett Dalton. Brett stood at the intersection between hallway A and the gym wing, towering over most students with his varsity jacket hanging half unzipped like a personal banner of entitlement. Kyle Mercer and Logan Hanks flanked him, like shadows who preferred obeying over thinking. "Yo!" Brett said loudly, his voice echoing against the lockers. "Didn't know they were bussing in charity cases this semester," a few students snorted. Someone muttered, "Damn!" under their breath. The air tightened. Talia stopped, pivoting just enough to face him. Her eyes met Brett's, sharp, unwavering, unbothered. She didn't flinch. She didn't roll her eyes. She didn't even blink. She just stared at him with a calm, surgical stillness that made Brett's smug grin twitch. It wasn't the reaction he expected. It wasn't fear. It wasn't embarrassment. It was something far worse for his ego, defiance. That tiny shift, barely visible to anyone but Brett, ignited his temper. His nostrils flared, his jaw tightened. He felt the hall watching him, waiting for him to dominate the moment the way he always did. "What's that look supposed to mean?" he barked, stepping forward. Talia still didn't answer. Her silence was louder than any comeback. It stripped Brett of control, exposed his insecurity in front of his audience. And that humiliation was something he couldn't tolerate. Kyle, sensing Brett's brewing anger, lifted his phone with a sly grin. "Dude," he whispered, though loud enough for Logan to hear, "this angle's perfect. If she so much as breathes wrong, we can flip it on her." Logan nodded. "She's already got the attitude. They'll believe anything." Talia finally spoke, voice low but firm. "Your words say more about you than they do about me." A small ooh rippled through the hall. Brett's ears turned red. Someone stifled a laugh. For the first time in a long time, Brett Dalton wasn't winning. Drama pulsed like electricity through the air. He stepped closer, invading her space. "You think you're tough because you can stare. You don't know who you're dealing with." "No," Talia replied, lifting her chin slightly. "I just don't fear you." That sentence, smooth, effortless, devastating, landed like a slap Brett couldn't dodge. And then Kyle delivered the first twist of the war they were about to unleash. Holding up his phone, he smirked. "I got all that. Enough to make her look like she started it." Brett's frustration morphed into a cruel spark of opportunity. A single stare from Talia had triggered something she didn't intend. A bruised ego, a wounded pride, and now, armed with Kyle's recording, a dangerous plan forming behind Brett's cold smile. This wasn't just the moment Talia made her presence known. This was the moment she unknowingly sparked the kind of battle she had never asked for, and Brett intended to retaliate in the most humiliating, twisted way he could think of. The path to Wing B was always quieter than the rest of the school. Narrower halls, dimmer lights, and fewer cameras. Most students avoided it unless their schedule forced them through. It was the kind of place where trouble could happen without leaving much evidence. Exactly why Brett sent Logan there first. Talia had no idea she was being set up when she turned the corner, holding her binder tight to her chest. The noise from the main hall faded, replaced by the low hum of flickering lights overhead. Her steps were calm, steady, until a figure emerged from the opposite end, walking with unnatural precision. Logan Hanks. He didn't just walk toward her. He aimed himself at her like a missile with a pre-planned trajectory. Talia noticed too late. She shifted slightly to the right, but Logan mirrored the movement intentionally. Then, bam! His shoulder slammed into hers with enough force to jolt her sideways. Her binder flew from her arms, papers scattering across the floor like white shrapnel. "Ow! What the hell?" Talia gasped, more startled than hurt. But Logan reacted as if he had been stabbed. He clutched his shoulder dramatically, stumbling back. "What is wrong with you?" he yelled. "She attacked me. She attacked me on purpose." His voice echoed down the empty hall, loud enough to reach the ears of the onlookers lurking nearby. Students Brett had positioned strategically. Talia blinked in disbelief. "What are you talking about? You walked straight into me." A few students appeared from behind the lockers, faces pale, glancing nervously between Logan and Talia. They had seen everything, every step, every intentional move, and their silence spoke volumes of their fear. One girl whispered to her friend, "If we say he's lying, Brett will destroy us." Logan pointed at Talia with the confidence of someone who expected backup. "She shoved me. You all saw it." And like a cue in a script, the students nodded, even those whose eyes were filled with guilt. "Yeah, she did. I think she pushed him first. I saw it happen." The lies rippled outward, stacking on top of each other, each one a shovel of dirt thrown onto Talia's truth. Talia stepped back, breath trembling with anger. "That's not what happened, and you know it." Her voice wasn't frantic. It was controlled. But control couldn't save her here. Not in Wing B, not with Brett's pawns surrounding her. Logan smirked, sensing the power swinging in his favor. "You better watch yourself. People like you think you can just—" He didn't finish the sentence. A pair of heels clicked sharply against the linoleum floor. Ms. Hawthorne. Her presence sliced through the tension. She looked stern, strict, and exhausted. Exactly the kind of teacher who hated dealing with conflict and preferred the simplest explanation, even if it was the wrong one. "What is going on here?" she demanded. Logan instantly straightened, switching from aggressive to wounded. "Ms. Hawthorne, she attacked me for no reason," Talia protested. "He ran into me on purpose. The cameras—" "There are no cameras in this hallway, Miss Monroe." Hawthorne cut her off sharply, as if the lack of evidence was somehow her fault. The teacher didn't ask witnesses what they saw. She didn't question the unnatural placement of the students. She didn't even glance at the papers scattered across the ground. Instead, she looked Talia up and down with a mixture of annoyance and suspicion. "Logan is one of our student athletes," she said coldly. "He's never been in trouble. You, on the other hand, are new here, and already causing problems." The unfairness slammed into Talia harder than Logan's shoulder had. "That's not right. I didn't do anything." Ms. Hawthorne raised her hand to silence her. "Enough. I will be reporting this incident." Her tone was final, unyielding. The hallway felt suddenly smaller, air tightening around Talia's ribs. And then came the moment that sealed the injustice. Logan leaned closer to Ms. Hawthorne and muttered, "She threatened me too. I was scared." It was a brazen lie, a reckless lie, a lie so ridiculous that even the students backing him looked uneasy. But Miss Hawthorne believed it instantly, or perhaps she wanted to. "Miss Monroe, you will accompany me to the office," she ordered, pointing down the hall. Logan grinned. The bystanders slipped away before Talia could speak another word. In a matter of minutes, a collision she didn't cause had become a fabricated assault charge, one that would follow her straight into the administrative system. A single staged bump, barely a second long, had now become the foundation of a false narrative strong enough to bury her voice. And as Logan sent Brett a victorious text, it became clear. Sabotaging Talia was going to be much easier than they'd imagined. The lockers in Wing A always had a metallic echo, sharp, hollow, and unforgiving, the kind of sound that bounced around the corridor long after the last student had left. When the final bell for fourth period rang, the hallway thinned out quickly, students rushing toward lunch or their next class. Within a minute, the place was nearly empty. Perfect for Brett Dalton's next move. Talia's locker sat near the far end of the row, right beside a pillar that created an awkward blind spot, a notorious camera dead zone. The administration knew about it, but fixing it had never been a priority. Brett saw opportunity the moment he learned where her locker was assigned. Kyle Mercer arrived first, glancing over his shoulder twice to make sure no one was around. "Hurry," he muttered. "We have like 30 seconds. Brett smirked and pulled a small folding knife from his pocket. "Relax. This is going to take 10. He flipped the blade open for a second. Not enough to activate the hall cameras, but long enough to admire the reflection. "You know what's funny?" he said, while shoving the knife into Talia's locker through the small vent slot. "She thinks a stare-down makes her equal." Kyle lifted his phone and started recording. "This'll be perfect. Admin loves evidence. Doesn't matter if it's fake." Brett chuckled. "Especially when it's her." The knife dropped inside with a soft metallic clink. The sound was small, but in the empty hallway it echoed like a threat. Kyle zoomed in on Brett's hand near the locker door, angling the shot to make it look like Talia had placed the weapon herself. "Got it," he said. "Let's go." Before leaving, Brett wiped the handle of the locker with his sleeve, just in case. He didn't need fingerprints. He needed a storyline. 10 minutes later, as students trickled back in for the next class, Kyle rushed toward the main office, fake panic in his voice. I need to report something. I saw Talia Monroe with a knife." Within seconds, Ms. Hawthorne was marching through the hallway with her tight bun bouncing with every step, her face set in a permanent scowl. She spotted Talia near the water fountain. "Miss Monroe," she snapped. "Come here, now." Talia stiffened. "Is something wrong?" "You tell me," Hawthorne said, grabbing Talia's wrist with surprising force. "I received a report. You need to open your locker immediately." Students began to gather, sensing drama. Always more exciting than their next class. Talia followed, confusion sharpening into dread as they approached her locker. Brett and Kyle lurked near the end of the hall, pretending to be bystanders, though their smirks betrayed them. When Hawthorne stopped in front of locker 214, Talia felt the weight of the moment settle in her chest. "Why do I need to open it?" she asked. "Because you've been accused of possessing contraband," Hawthorne said. Talia's voice trembled with frustration. "I haven't done anything." "Open it," Hawthorne ordered, arms crossed, tone final. Hands shaking, Talia turned the lock. It clicked open. She pulled the door wide and froze. There, lying right on top of her books, gleaming under the fluorescent light, was a black folding knife. The hallway erupted. A wave of gasps, whispers, and muttered curses rippled through the students. Kyle whispered loudly, "Wow, I didn't think she'd be that stupid." Talia staggered back. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. She stared at the knife as if it were a hallucination. I don't know how that got there. That's not mine." But Hawthorne didn't hesitate, not even a second. "Bringing a weapon to school is a serious offense, Miss Monroe." "That's not my knife," Talia insisted, panic finally breaking through her composure. Hawthorne didn't look convinced. She didn't even look curious. She just pulled out her walkie-talkie. "This is Ms. Hawthorne. We have a weapons violation, requesting Officer Reed to Wing A immediately." Brett's grin widened. The plan was complete. A weapon that wasn't hers, a lie crafted in silence, had now become the most dangerous truth in the eyes of the school. And as Ms. Hawthorne radioed for the school police officer, Brett leaned against a locker, satisfied. Everything was falling into place exactly the way he wanted. The hallway outside Talia's locker felt colder than before, emptier, quieter, as if the building itself sensed what was about to happen. Students huddled near the far end, trying to look innocent while hiding the anticipation burning in their eyes. Brett stood front and center, arms crossed, smirk sharpened like a blade. Kyle was already poised with his phone camera. Then the heavy footsteps came. Officer Reed rounded the corner with the authority of someone who never needed to explain himself. His boots struck the linoleum floor with a rhythmic finality. Thud, thud, thud. And every student stepped back as if gravity obeyed him. His uniform was immaculate, badge polished, radio crackling softly at his shoulder. He stopped in front of Talia's locker and looked her up and down, gaze cold and clinical. "Where is the weapon?" he asked. Ms. Hawthorne gestured to the open locker. "Inside, top shelf." Reed leaned forward, eyes narrowing at the knife. The reflection gleamed across his pupils like confirmation. When he straightened, his expression was already settled. Judgment formed, verdict decided. "You," he said, pointing directly at Talia. "Turn around. Hands behind your back." Talia's breath hitched. "Wait, Officer Reed, that's not my weapon. Someone put it there. I didn't touch it, I swear." "I didn't ask for a speech," Reed snapped. His voice had the cold bite of winter metal. "Turn around, hands behind your back. Now." Talia shook her head slowly, disbelief knotting her chest. "Please, just hear me out. I didn't—" Reed took a step closer, towering over her. "You're in possession of a prohibited weapon on school property. That makes you a potential threat. Follow my instructions." "But," I said, "turn around." He reached for her arm. Talia recoiled instinctively, not in defiance, but in fear. Yet Reed interpreted it exactly how he wanted. "She's resisting," he muttered loudly enough for the onlookers to hear. A wave of gasps traveled down the hall. Brett's grin widened. "Oh, this is too good," he whispered to Kyle, who began filming with enthusiasm matching a spectator at a concert. Talia swallowed hard. Her pulse hammered in her throat. She forced her breathing steady and raised her voice, not shouting, but firm. "Officer Reed, I'm not resisting. I am telling you this is a setup." Reed didn't care. He didn't pause. He didn't even blink. "Face the locker," he commanded. "Hands behind your back." Talia's fingers trembled, but she complied, turning slowly. Her forehead hovered inches from the cold metal of her locker door. Students whispered behind her. "Is she actually getting arrested? Damn." Brett must be loving this. Talia felt her dignity peeling away, layer by layer. Every breath felt heavier than the last. Reed reached for his cuffs. Before the metal could clasp around her wrists, she blurted out, voice breaking, not from fear but fury. "This is illegal. You're violating procedure." Reed scoffed, cutting her off with a laugh so sharp it echoed. "Please," he said, leaning down to whisper near her ear. "What does a kid like you know about the law?" He straightened, eyes gleaming with cruel confidence. Talia clenched her jaw, voice low but steady. "More than you think." For a split second, something flickered across Reed's face. A hint of irritation, maybe uncertainty, but he buried it behind his authority. "That's enough," he barked, grabbing her wrists more forcefully than necessary. "Keep talking and you'll only make it worse." Brett zoomed in with his phone, whispering gleefully, "Man, this is gold." "She's done," Kyle added. "She looks terrified. This'll blow up so hard." Talia felt the cuffs tighten around her skin, cold metal biting into the soft flesh of her wrists. She inhaled sharply, but didn't cry. She refused to give Brett that satisfaction. Reed pulled her away from the locker, holding her arms as if she were a violent offender. Students stared with wide eyes and parted like a sea as he marched her down the hall. No one stepped forward. No one said she was innocent. No one told the truth. Reed thought he had just asserted control, but the words he mocked her for would become the very evidence of his downfall. And with the cuffs locked in place, Reed made the choice that would escalate everything. He decided to escort Talia out in front of the entire school. The hallway felt impossibly long under the harsh neon lights, cold, bluish, almost surgical. Every flicker of the bulbs above seemed to highlight just how exposed Talia was, as Officer Reed forced her forward, hands cuffed behind her back, wrists already aching from the pressure of the metal. He shoved her once, hard enough that her shoulder collided with a locker. A sharp sting shot through her arm. "Face forward," Reed barked. Talia bit down on a gasp, but one escaped anyway. A quiet sound, raw and involuntary. That was all Brett needed. "Oh, look at that," Brett laughed, pointing a mocking finger at her. "The tough girl's crying." Kyle zoomed in with his phone camera, catching the single tear that slipped out of Talia's eye, not from fear, but from pain so sharp it stole her breath. Logan leaned against a locker, arms folded as if watching the best entertainment of his week. "Damn, Reed," Logan called out. "You sure she isn't armed with anything else? Maybe check her socks next." The hallway erupted in laughter. Reed didn't tell them to stop recording. He didn't push them away. He didn't even acknowledge their cruelty. Instead, he tightened his grip on Talia's arm and pushed her forward again. "Walk," Talia inhaled shakily. She refused to bow her head. She refused to let Brett see defeat. Even in cuffs, even hurting, she held on to the last shard of dignity she had left. Her voice came out soft, barely above a whisper, but steady. "The truth will come out." Brett clapped slowly, theatrically, sarcastically. "Oh, listen to that. She thinks anyone's gonna believe her." Kyle snorted. "They will after this video." He lifted his phone, making sure to capture Talia being dragged down the hall, her breath unsteady, her cheeks wet from pain. The scene was cruel, and Brett reveled in every second of it. "This is going straight to the team chat," Brett bragged. "Coach is gonna flip when he sees what she did." Kyle hit send. The video uploaded instantly. "A masterpiece," Logan muttered. But none of them noticed the girl standing 2 lockers down, Emma Castillo, her eyes wide with horror, her fingers trembling around the strap of her backpack. She had seen everything from the beginning. She had seen Brett plant the knife. She had watched Logan fake the collision. She had stayed silent because fear froze her, until now. When her phone buzzed with the group message notification, she opened Brett's video, and her stomach dropped. The angle, the audio, the background, everything about the video screamed setup, not proof. Her hands shook. She locked her screen, heart pounding. She wasn't brave enough yet, but she knew this video would haunt her until she did something. Meanwhile, Reed marched Talia forward as if parading a criminal. Students parted left and right, whispering viciously. "She brought a knife? I knew she looked trouble." Brett said she threatened Logan. Wow, she didn't even last a week here. Talia felt every word like a thorn lodging deeper into her ribs. The humiliation, the injustice, the silence of the crowd, it all pressed in on her until she thought she might collapse. But she kept walking, her shoes echoed on the linoleum. Her cuffs rattled behind her back. Her chin trembled, but she lifted it higher. Brett followed a few feet away, recording the whole spectacle like he was documenting a trophy moment. His grin widened each time Talia winced. "Make sure you get her face," Logan said. "People love a good meltdown." "Oh, I am," Brett replied. "I want everyone to see exactly what she is." But he had no idea that his own video would soon become the rope tightening around his neck. What Brett intended as digital ammunition to destroy Talia would soon become the evidence that saved her. Oblivious to the storm quietly forming against him, Officer Reed tightened his grip and dragged Talia toward the administrative office, where the so-called investigation was waiting to begin. The disciplinary office smelled like old carpet and stale coffee, an odor trapped behind a heavy wooden door that shut with a dull, ominous thud as Officer Reed pushed Talia inside. The fluorescent light above flickered, humming faintly, casting a sickly yellow tint across the cramped room. It felt less like a school office and more like an interrogation chamber. Miss Hawthorne stood behind her desk, arms crossed, expression carved from stone. She didn't offer Talia a seat. She didn't ask if she was okay. She simply watched her like an inconvenience that needed to be processed and removed. Reed placed Talia in the chair directly facing the desk, her hands still cuffed behind her back. The metal dug deeper into her skin now, cold and relentless. Her wrists were throbbing. "Sit up straight," Reed snapped. Talia bit back the urge to respond. She lifted her chin instead, holding on to the last fragments of her dignity. Miss Hawthorne opened a manila folder with dramatic emphasis, flipping through papers she hadn't even bothered to read. "Let's get to it," she said. Voice clipped. "Miss Monroe, you've been reported for possession of a weapon, threatening a student, and resisting an officer. Serious offenses." Talia's jaw dropped slightly. "None of that is true." Reed let out a sharp laugh. "Yeah? Because the knife magically teleported into your locker." Talia glared. "Someone put it there." Ms. Hawthorne exhaled as if exhausted by Talia's existence. "There were witnesses, Miss Monroe, multiple. Witnesses who lie for Brett and his friends." Talia shot back, her voice trembling with anger. "That is an accusation," Hawthorne warned, "and you are in no position to make accusations." Talia's nails dug into her palms. Her words were small in this room, shrinking under the weight of two adults determined to crush them. Reed leaned against the filing cabinet, arms folded smugly. "Let's not forget she resisted arrest." Talia snapped her head toward him. "I didn't resist. I moved because you grabbed me without warning. Too hard." Reed smirked. "You refused my instructions." "No," Talia corrected. "You refused to listen." Hawthorne slammed the folder shut. "That's enough. We're not here to debate." Of course they weren't. They weren't here to understand. They weren't here to consider truth. They were here to solidify a narrative they'd already decided on. Talia Monroe was guilty. Drama thickened in the air like smoke. Hawthorne pulled out a form. "Given the seriousness of the situation, we're reviewing suspension and potential police involvement." Talia's stomach dropped. "You can't do that without hearing my side." "We did hear your side," Hawthorne snapped. "You said you're innocent. That doesn't match the evidence." "What evidence?" Talia demanded. "A knife someone planted? Lies from students terrified of Brett? That's not evidence." Hawthorne cut her off sharply. "Enough." But Talia didn't stop. She leaned forward, voice steady despite the tremor beneath it, then checked the cameras. The room froze. Reed's eyes flicked to Hawthorne. Hawthorne's lips tightened. A moment of hesitation, tiny, fragile, flickered across her face. Then she forced a sigh. "The cameras in Wing A have been malfunctioning all week." Talia stared at her, disbelief widening her eyes. "Malfunctioning? Convenient." "That's the reality," Hawthorne said coolly. "No," Talia whispered. "That's an excuse." Her voice didn't rise. It sharpened. Reed stepped forward, looming over her. "Careful, Miss Monroe. You're already in enough trouble." Talia lifted her chin defiantly. "The truth is out there, and someone will see it." Hawthorne rolled her eyes and closed the folder again. "This conversation is over. We'll contact your parents." The decision was final. Cold, dismissive, dripping with the arrogance of unchecked authority. When the people meant to uphold justice choose the wrong side, truth isn't silenced. It's weaponized. And now, with nowhere left to corner her, they reached for the one person they thought would be powerless to help, her father. The office felt even smaller than before. Too warm, too quiet, too charged with the kind of tension that made the air feel thick. Officer Reed stood beside the desk, holding a clipboard, pretending to look composed, though his grip on the pen betrayed a faint tremor. Miss Hawthorne hovered near the filing cabinet, arms crossed so tightly her knuckles were white. Talia sat in the metal chair, hands cuffed behind her back, still fighting to keep her breathing even. Reed cleared his throat. "We're calling your parent now," he muttered, as if it were a royal decree. He seemed almost eager, convinced that this phone call would seal the narrative he'd crafted around her. He dialed the number listed on Talia's file. The phone rang once, twice. On the third ring, someone answered. A voice, calm, deep, steady, filled the room through the speaker. "Yes?" Reed straightened, suddenly filled with performance energy. "Mr. Monroe, this is Officer Reed from Crestwood High. We're calling to inform you that your daughter is being detained for possession of a weapon, disruption of school activity, and aggressive behavior toward students and staff." He delivered the words with the confidence of a man who had never been questioned in his authority. There was a small pause, a silence so controlled, so precise, it cracked through the room like a subtle earthquake. "Then, is that so?" the man on the phone said. Reed lifted his chin. "Yes, sir. We're doing our best to manage the situation." Another pause. Long enough for Hawthorne to glance at Reed nervously. Then the voice returned. Quiet, but carrying a weight that immediately shifted the air. "This is Judge Malcolm Monroe." Reed froze. Talia lifted her head. Hawthorne's lips parted in shock, color draining from her face. But the voice didn't stop. "I will be arriving in 15 minutes, Judge Monroe continued, tone still calm, still composed, but now edged with steel. "Until then, do not touch my daughter. Do not speak to her. Do not move her." The warning was unmistakable. Then came the final blow. "Do not lay a hand on her." He hung up. The click of the disconnection echoed louder than any shout. Reed lowered the phone slowly, as if afraid it would explode in his hand. Hawthorne blinked twice, then stumbled instinctively toward her desk, searching for something, papers, justification, a hole to hide in. Judge Monroe?" Reed stammered. Talia didn't say anything. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply watched them, expression unreadable, as the adults who had been so quick to condemn her now tripped over their own fear. Reed swallowed hard. Why wasn't that noted in her file?" "It is," Hawthorne whispered, voice cracking. "You just didn't bother reading past the first page." Their eyes met. For a moment, both looked like people realizing they had just stepped into traffic seconds before a semi-truck roared past. "Judge Monroe," Reed repeated, the meaning sinking in deeper. "Federal Judicial District." "Exactly," Hawthorne breathed. Silence followed. Thick, suffocating. All this time, they'd believed they held the power, that they could shape the narrative however they wished, that accusing a black girl in handcuffs would go smoothly, quietly, unquestioned, but their arrogance had blinded them. Because they hadn't arrested just anyone's daughter. They had arrested the daughter of a man who upheld the law for a living. A man who could dismantle their careers with a single report. A man whose name alone could freeze an entire room. Reed ran a hand over his mouth. We should untie her." "No," Hawthorne hissed. "If we touch her now, it'll look worse." "You think this can look worse?" Reed shot back. Their panic climbed higher. Too late, too frantic, too revealing. Talia sat still, wrists bruised, eyes calm. For the first time since this nightmare began, she allowed herself a quiet breath of relief. They were afraid, finally. Those who believed they were untouchable were about to learn what true accountability looked like, and as the hallway outside the office fell into an uncanny hush, every student turned toward the entrance, because the moment Judge Malcolm Monroe stepped through that door, nothing at Crestwood High would ever be the same again. The front lobby of Crestwood High had never felt so small, Students clustered in corners, whispering behind lockers and pillars. Teachers paused mid-conversation, their words dying halfway through sentences. Even the security guard at the welcome desk straightened instinctively when the glass doors slid open. Judge Malcolm Monroe stepped inside. He didn't rush. He didn't glare. He didn't need to. Every step he took echoed with a quiet authority, measured, deliberate, impossible to ignore. The man carried himself the way mountains carry gravity, silently, but with a force that made people move aside whether they wanted to or not. His charcoal suit was immaculate, his shoulders straight, his jaw set. But it was the expression in his eyes, controlled, razor-sharp, that made the hallway freeze in place. Officer Reed, who had been waiting stiffly near the office door, swallowed so hard his Adam's apple bobbed twice. Hawthorne hovered behind him, wringing her hands like someone bracing for impact. Judge Monroe didn't spare them a glance. His attention locked instantly on Talia, standing just behind Reed, wrists bruised red from the handcuffs, cheeks blotched from holding back tears. "Talia," he said softly. Her composure cracked. Tears spilled down her face before she could stop them. She stepped forward and he closed the distance, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. "Dad," her voice broke, small and trembling. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't touch the cuffs. He simply placed his other hand gently on her cheek and said, with controlled fury simmering beneath every syllable, "I'm here." The entire lobby seemed to exhale. Then he finally turned to Officer Reed. His expression changed. Not loud, not hostile, but deadly calm. The calm of someone who knew exactly how much damage he could inflict simply by speaking. "Officer Reed," he began. Reed stiffened as if preparing for a verdict. "Yes, Your Honor." Judge Monroe gestured toward the cuffs. "Remove those." Reed scrambled forward, nearly dropping the key in his haste. As the cuffs snapped open, Talia rubbed her sore wrists. Her eyes burning with humiliation she refused to show. Monroe stepped between them protectively. "Explain to me," he said slowly, "why my daughter was handcuffed inside a school without probable cause." Reed opened his mouth, but no words came out. Hawthorne cut in, desperate to regain control. "Judge Monroe, there was a report." "I didn't ask for a report," he interrupted, his tone slicing through her sentence like a scalpel. "I asked for probable cause," Hawthorne faltered. We received information that she had a weapon." "Information from whom?" "Students," she said quickly. "Names?" She froze. He raised an eyebrow. "You don't remember? For accusations serious enough to justify restraining a minor?" Reed stepped forward, flustered. There was a knife in her locker, sir. We found it." "Then show me the footage." Silence. Monroe repeated, "Show me." "The footage." Hawthorne cleared her throat. "The cameras in that hallway, unfortunately, have been malfunctioning." A muscle in Monroe's jaw twitched. "Malfunctioning? Convenient timing." His words weren't loud, but the impact was thunderous. "Pull the maintenance logs," he ordered. Reed blinked. "Sir, maintenance logs for the camera system. Now." Reed hurried to the front desk computer, fingers shaking as he navigated the system. What appeared on the screen drained the color from Hawthorne's face. "System repair completed at 12:42 p.m. today," Monroe read aloud, eyes narrowing. "Less than an hour ago. Not earlier that week. Not yesterday. Not long-term malfunction. 1 hour ago. Someone had tampered with the system, and Judge Monroe knew it." He turned toward Hawthorne, voice low and lethal. "Who authorized that repair?" Hawthorne stuttered. I'll have to check." "No," he said sharply. "You'll give me the name, and then you'll open every single camera feed from hallways A and B." His calm was gone. Now he was commanding. Students held their breath. Reed looked ready to faint, and Talia, standing beside her father, felt hope ignite for the first time since the nightmare began. The truth was finally taking shape. And it was not on the school's side. Judge Monroe stepped forward, eyes fixed on the monitors. "Open the feeds for every camera in those hallways. All of them. Now." The security room was colder than the rest of the building, its walls lined with steel-gray cabinets, humming servers, and a massive array of surveillance screens glowing an eerie blue. It felt like the kind of place where truth either lived or died, depending on who controlled the footage. Judge Monroe stepped inside first. Officer Reed trailed behind him, sweat forming along his hairline. Ms. Hawthorne followed last, clutching her clipboard like a shield. The school's lone IT technician, a nervous man named Mr. Clary, stood stiffly beside the console, eyes darting nervously between the adults. "Pull up all feeds from hallways A and B," Judge Monroe instructed. Clary nodded quickly. Yes, Your Honor." His fingers flew across the keyboard, windows opening one after another. The large central monitor flickered, then stabilized on a time-stamped grid of video footage. Monroe folded his arms. "Rewind to noon," Clary scrolled back. "Now," Monroe said. "Play it." The footage began. The first screen showed Brett Dalton looking around before signaling to Kyle Mercer. They moved toward Talia's locker like two wolves marking territory. Kyle pulled out his phone. Brett held a small object in his hand. Zooming in confirmed it, the knife, the very same one that had been found in Talia's locker. Hawthorne gasped. Reed paled. On the screen, Brett inserted the knife through the locker vent and tapped twice on the metal. The same faint clink Talia had heard but couldn't identify. Monroe turned his head slowly, eyes burning into Reed. "That," he said quietly, "looks like planting evidence." Reed swallowed hard. I didn't know." "You didn't check," Monroe corrected. "Because you didn't want to." Clary clicked another feed. This time, the camera captured Logan stalking the narrow hallway of Wing B. He positioned himself precisely in Talia's path. The video played out the same choreography Talia had described. Logan adjusting his steps, matching her movements, and slamming into her shoulder deliberately. Then came his dramatized fall, his fake outrage, his staged accusation, and the so-called witnesses appearing moments later, prepositioned by design. The silence in the room thickened. Hawthorne's face drained of color. She looked like she might collapse. Reed stared at the screen, mouth slightly open, veins tightening along his neck. Clary hesitated, then pointed to another icon on the monitor. There's more." Monroe nodded. "Play it." The next clip showed Officer Reed restraining Talia, but not as he had described it, not as standard procedure, not as guidance. The footage revealed Reed grabbing Talia's arm with excessive force, pressing her against the locker hard enough that the impact echoed through the hall. Her face twisted in pain. She wasn't resisting. She was flinching. The entire room froze. Reed's complexion turned ghost white. "That?" he stammered. "That angle doesn't show everything." "It shows enough," Monroe said, voice low and dangerous, "to initiate a use-of-force investigation." Hawthorne gripped the edge of the table to steady herself. Monroe stepped closer to the screen. The glow flickered across his features like fire catching a spark. "You humiliated a minor," he said evenly. "You escalated without evidence. You laid hands on my daughter before asking a single question, and you called it procedure." Reed opened his mouth again, but no words came out. He knew what that clip meant. For his badge, for his career, for everything. The truth, undeniable, unfiltered, burned across the screens. Monroe straightened, the room charged with a quiet fury that made Clary step back instinctively. "You tampered with justice," he said. "Worse, you used it as a weapon against a child." No one spoke. The screens continued to play, looping the sequence of lies. Monroe exhaled slowly and turned to Clary. "Print those clips, save them to a secure drive, and lock the originals." Clary nodded so quickly he almost tripped over himself. Judge Monroe then looked at Hawthorne, who shrank under his gaze. "Call their parents," he ordered. "All three of them. Brett Dalton, Kyle Mercer, and Logan Hanks." His voice held no anger, no shouting, just finality. the kind that signaled the beginning of consequences. They had counted on silence, fear, and manipulated narratives. What they had not counted on was the one thing that never lies. And now, with the truth laid bare across every screen, Judge Monroe prepared for the next step, the confrontation with the bullies' parents. The conference room felt suffocating, its beige walls and fluorescent lighting amplifying every ounce of tension filling the space. A long, polished table stretched down the center, and at one end sat Judge Monroe, composed as carved stone. At the opposite side were the families of Brett Dalton, Kyle Mercer, and Logan Hanks, shifting in their chairs with visible discomfort. Brett sat between his parents, knees bouncing uncontrollably. Kyle avoided eye contact with everyone. Logan kept wiping sweat from his palms. Officer Reed stood near the door like a reprimanded child. Miss Hawthorne hovered beside him, too pale to speak. The air cracked when the meeting officially began. Mr. Dalton, Brett's father, broad-shouldered, red-faced, leaned forward and jabbed a finger at the camera footage still paused on the screen. "This is being blown out of proportion," he snapped. "Teenagers bump into each other all the time. And that knife clip? It could be interpreted many ways." Judge Monroe didn't move. "The footage shows your son planting a weapon. This is not interpretation." Mrs. Mercer chimed in, voice shrill. "Kids make mistakes. That doesn't mean they deserve to be labeled as criminals." Monroe turned a page in the legal binder he'd brought, his tone maddeningly calm. "Planting a weapon on a student and making false accusations that lead to unlawful detainment qualifies as harassment, defamation, and intentional endangerment." Kyle's mother swallowed hard. "And," Monroe continued, "Officer Reed's excessive force escalated the situation beyond school jurisdiction. What happened to my daughter was not just bullying, it was a chain of deliberate acts that violated multiple state education and child safety statutes." Reed flinched. Hawthorne stared at the floor. Logan's father shifted uncomfortably. "Let's not make this bigger than it needs to be." Monroe closed the binder with a soft thud that sounded like a gavel. "It is as big as it needs to be. Your sons orchestrated a targeted attack, and they recorded themselves doing it." Brett's entire body stiffened. His eyes widened. "That video, it wasn't supposed to see the light of day?" Monroe finished. "Yes, I'm sure." Brett sank into his chair, color draining from his face as he realized the magnitude of what he had unleashed. A tense silence fell over the room. Then the door opened. Everyone turned. Emma Castillo, the quiet girl from earlier, stepped inside, clutching her phone, her expression trembling but resolute. Behind her stood Miss Bennett, an English teacher known for her fairness. Emma cleared her throat. I saw everything. Brett sent the video to the team chat. He bragged about getting Talia arrested." Mrs. Dalton shot up. "You're lying!" Ms. Bennett stepped forward firmly. "She is not lying. She showed me the video. I reviewed the metadata myself. It was recorded and shared by your son." Every parent froze. Every lie collapsed. Every flimsy defense shattered. Brett's face crumpled as he buried his hands in his hair. Reality was no longer something he could outrun. Monroe nodded once, a silent acknowledgment of Emma's courage. "Thank you," he said. "Your testimony confirms the intent behind the act. This was not an accident, nor a misunderstanding. This was a coordinated assault." Drama pressed into the room like a crushing weight. The bullies' parents had nothing left to argue. They weren't facing exaggeration. They were facing evidence. Evidence their own sons had created. The downfall they tried to engineer for Talia had turned back on them, all because Brett couldn't resist bragging. And now, backed into a corner by undeniable truth, the school had no choice but to follow disciplinary law to the very letter. The disciplinary boardroom felt more solemn than any courtroom Talia had ever imagined. 3 administrators sat at the long table, stoic, tight-lipped, and painfully aware that today's decision would echo far beyond the school walls. The blinds were half drawn, letting thin stripes of afternoon light cut across the tense faces in the room. Talia sat beside her father, still shaken, but finally free of handcuffs. Brett, Kyle, and Logan were lined up across the table with their parents, whisper-arguing behind them. Ms. Hawthorne sat rigidly in a separate chair, her breath shallow. Officer Reed stood near the back of the room, unable to meet anyone's eyes. The chair of the board cleared his throat. "We've reviewed the footage, the statements, and the evidence provided. Before we announce our findings, each party will be addressed individually." He turned first to Reed. "Officer Reed, your actions toward Miss Monroe violated school partnership policing guidelines, including the use of excessive physical force on a minor without reasonable cause." Reed's face went ashen. "We are placing you on immediate suspension pending internal investigation." Reed opened his mouth, but no explanation formed. His badge suddenly felt heavier than steel. Next, the board looked at Ms. Hawthorne. "Ms. Hawthorne, your handling of the situation demonstrated negligence, failure to review conflicting accounts, and a pattern of biased judgment." The word biased hit her harder than anything else. She flinched. "You will undergo a full review for professional misconduct." A strained silence followed. Then the board turned to the bullies. "Brett Dalton, Kyle Mercer, Logan Hanks, the evidence shows intentional harassment, fabrication of events, planting of contraband, inciting false accusations, and coordinated deceit." All three boys seemed to shrink in their seats. Brett's mother grabbed his hand, whispering frantic reassurances that no longer held weight. "The recommended disciplinary action," the chair continued, "is long-term suspension and the initiation of a district-level behavioral hearing." Brett's father shot up from his seat. "This is outrageous. You're ruining their futures for their actions," Judge Monroe said calmly. All eyes snapped to him. Mr. Dalton's voice trembled. "Judge Monroe, sir, they're just kids. Surely you don't want to ruin their lives over one mistake. Can't we just move past this? For everyone's sake?" His tone softened into pleading desperation. Kyle's mother joined in. "Please, they're good boys. They panicked. Let's handle this quietly." For a moment the room held its breath, waiting for Monroe to leverage his authority, waiting for him to decide their son's fate. But Monroe shook his head. "I will not be part of this decision." Shock rippled through the room. "I am Talia's father," he continued. "If I intervene, even to show mercy, that becomes undue influence. These young men will be judged by the standards of the institution they violated, not by me." Hawthorne blinked. Reed stiffened. The bully's parents stared in disbelief. Monroe folded his hands, voice steady. "True justice does not require my presence to function." The board members exchanged glances, relieved and strengthened by the clarity of his stance. The chair nodded firmly. "Then the disciplinary ruling stands." Brett's shoulders collapsed. Logan buried his face in his hands. Kyle stared blankly at the table, realizing the magnitude of what they had done. When the man with power chooses not to wield it, the system can finally reveal what it was meant to uphold. And with the ruling delivered, the school summoned the boys for the final official announcement of their consequences. The auditorium buzzed with the restless energy of hundreds of students packed into rows of seats. Teachers lined the walls, arms folded, faces tense with anticipation. A podium stood center stage beneath a banner that read, "Crestwood High Assembly," though today's gathering felt less like an assembly and more like a verdict waiting to be spoken aloud. The chatter died abruptly when the disciplinary board entered. Whispers rippled. "They're announcing it today. Did they suspend Brett? What about Logan?" Talia sat in the front row beside her father. Her pulse thudded in her ears. This time, she wasn't handcuffed. She wasn't alone. She wasn't surrounded by predators. She was surrounded by witnesses. The board chair approached the microphone. "Students and faculty of Crestwood High, after reviewing all evidence related to the incident on Monday involving Miss Talia Monroe and several other students, we are issuing an official announcement." The room held its breath. Brett Dalton, Kyle Mercer, and Logan Hanks have been found responsible for coordinated harassment, fabrication of events, and planting prohibited items on school property. A wave of gasps swept across the auditorium, followed by stunned silence. They will each receive a 45-day suspension effective immediately. Additionally, the chair continued, eyes sweeping toward Logan, Mr. Logan Hanks's case is being forwarded to the district board for further review due to the falsified accusation. Logan shrank into his seat. And Brett Dalton, the chair added, pausing long enough for the entire crowd to lean in, is hereby removed as captain of the Crestwood Tigers football team. The reaction was instant, a ripple of shock, a few scattered murmurs. Then one student clapped, then another, until the entire auditorium erupted into applause, a roaring wave of support rising like a tide around Talia. She stared, stunned, as students she barely knew rose to their feet, clapping, cheering, acknowledging her for the first time not as an outsider, but as someone who deserved justice. For the first time since she'd stepped into Crestwood, Talia felt seen. Ms. Bennett, the English teacher who stood for her, wiped a tear. Even some faculty members joined the applause, tired of remaining silent. But the biggest surprise came when a small group of students stepped forward from the side aisle. One of them, Emma Castillo, raised her hand. "Excuse me," she called out, voice trembling but brave. The room quieted. We started something." Emma turned to Talia, offering a small smile. "A student group. It's called Students for Justice. It's for anyone who wants to speak up when something wrong happens. And we want Talia Monroe to be our first speaker." Another wave of murmurs, then applause again, louder than before. Talia blinked rapidly, overwhelmed. She had expected to be cleared. She had hoped to be believed. But she had not imagined becoming a symbol. Not imagined students creating something because of her. She stood slowly, her father's hand steady on her shoulder. She didn't speak yet, but her presence alone drew more applause. For once, she wasn't fighting. She was being lifted. She had come to Crestwood High as a stranger, nearly left in disgrace, but now students stood for her, seeing her not as an outsider, but as a catalyst for change. And with the school unified in its support, there was only one step left. A public apology that the administration could no longer avoid. The entire student body gathered in the courtyard beneath the noon sun. The American flag fluttered above the stage, casting a wavering shadow across the crowd. Teachers lined the edges with stiff posture, some anxious, some ashamed, all waiting for what the administration had to say. At the center stood Principal Avery, usually composed, confident, and unshakably authoritative. Today his shoulders were tense, his hands clasped tightly together, and the microphone trembled slightly between his fingers. Talia stood near the front beside her father, surrounded by students from the newly formed Students for Justice. Emma Castillo hovered close, offering silent support. Whispers spread through the crowd, but none carried malice now. Principal Avery cleared his throat. His voice cracked at the first word. "Students, faculty, today I stand before you with something our school has not done nearly enough of. Accountability." The courtyard fell silent. He inhaled deeply. "We failed Talia Monroe." Every head turned toward her. Talia shifted, feeling the weight of hundreds of eyes. But for the first time, that weight didn't crush her. "We handled her case improperly," the principal continued. "We allowed bias, fear, and favoritism to influence our judgment. We did not listen. We did not investigate thoroughly. And we did not protect a student who trusted us to keep her safe." Teachers lowered their gazes. A few nodded, some with tears forming. Principal Avery's voice steadied. "For this, Talia, we owe you a sincere and public apology." A hush fell. His next words echoed across the courtyard. "I am deeply sorry." The sincerity in his tone rippled through the crowd. Even those who had once whispered assumptions about Talia now stood stone still, absorbing the gravity of the moment. A history teacher stepped forward unexpectedly. His voice shook. "I've been here 27 years, he said, looking at the students instead of the staff. "And I've watched too many moments like this pass unchallenged. I'm ashamed I didn't speak sooner. We all must change." Another teacher nodded in agreement. "This is not just about one incident. It's about a system we have allowed to rot." Principal Avery gave a solemn nod. "We will be reviewing all protocols, improving staff training, and establishing a student-led committee to ensure this never happens again." Emma squeezed Talia's hand. Then, something remarkable. Students began to clap. Not the hesitant, scattered applause from before, but a unified, powerful surge of support that rolled across the courtyard like a wave. One by one, heads turned toward Talia with new eyes. Respect, solidarity, understanding. Talia lifted her head, meeting their gazes. For the first time since she arrived at Crestwood High, the looks directed her way weren't filled with suspicion or judgment. They saw her, all of her, her courage, her voice, her truth, and she felt something shift in her chest, a spark, a strength, a place she hadn't been allowed to occupy before. For the first time, Talia didn't have to stand against the school. She stood at its center, and every eye met hers with respect she had fought so hard to deserve. But even with justice finally catching up, Talia knew she wasn't finished. There was still something she needed to say, something only she could deliver. The microphone stood at the edge of the stage, gleaming beneath the afternoon sun. A soft breeze rustled the courtyard, carrying murmurs of students who had gathered in a semicircle around the podium. Hundreds of faces watched, expectant and silent. Talia stepped forward. Her palms were damp, her breath trembled, but her spine remained straight, and her eyes lifted to meet the crowd, the same crowd that once whispered behind her back, the same one that had watched her walk through the halls in handcuffs. Today, they watched for a different reason. She adjusted the microphone. "I didn't think I'd ever speak here," she began, voice small but steady. "I didn't think anyone would want to listen." The courtyard stayed still. "When I came to Crestwood, I hoped to blend in, maybe make a friend, maybe find my place," she swallowed. "But instead, I learned how quickly people can judge you based on what they think they know." A few students shifted uncomfortably. "I learned how loud laughter sounds when it's aimed at you, and how quiet a hallway becomes when you're the one crying." Her voice wavered for a moment, but she caught it, pulling strength from the quiet hush that spread across the courtyard. "And I learned," she continued, "that silence is a kind of violence." A ripple moved through the students. "I'm not angry that people were scared," Talia said. "I understand fear. I felt it too. But I am angry that so many of you saw what was happening and chose not to say anything." Several students lowered their heads. Emma wiped tears from her cheeks. "I'm angry," Talia said softly, "because your silence told the bullies that what they did was okay." She paused, not for dramatic effect, but to breathe through the weight of her own words. "But today," she said, voice deepening with courage, "I saw something different. I saw people standing up, speaking out. I saw people clapping not because they had to, but because they knew it was right." She let the moment settle. "And that tells me something important. Change doesn't start with perfection. It starts with just one person deciding that silence isn't enough." Students nodded. Teachers blinked back tears. Even some of the faculty who once dismissed her now looked shaken by the truth echoing through the courtyard. Talia placed a hand over her heart. "I don't hate Brett, or Kyle, or Logan." Her voice softened. "I hate what they chose to do." A few gasps. "And I hope," she added, "that they learn from this, so no one else has to go through what I did." She stepped back slightly from the microphone, letting the final part of her message land. "If you ever find yourself watching something wrong unfold, don't just look away. Don't tell yourself someone else will act, because the silence you choose today becomes the injustice someone else suffers tomorrow." The crowd absorbed the words like a collective exhale. Some cried openly. Others wiped at their eyes, embarrassed. Talia lifted her chin. Yesterday, silence hurt me, she smiled faintly. But today, your voices helped me heal. The courtyard erupted into applause, not wild, not chaotic, but deeply respectful. A standing ovation that felt like a promise. Yesterday's silence had nearly destroyed her, but today, that silence had transformed into voices that finally carried truth. And as Talia stepped off the stage, walking toward her father, waiting at the edge of the crowd, the story moved toward its final chapter, the quiet, healing journey home. The sun dipped low on the horizon as Talia and her father walked along the quiet sidewalk toward home. The sky was a canvas of soft oranges and fading purples, the kind of sunset that made the world feel gentler than it had any right to be after a week like hers. Talia wrapped her arms around herself as the cool breeze brushed past. The events of the day still pulsed in her mind, the applause, the students standing, her own voice echoing across the courtyard. It felt surreal, like she had stepped into a version of her life she never imagined was possible. Judge Monroe walked beside her with the slow, steady gait of someone who had seen more battles than he ever wanted his daughter to fight. His presence was grounding, warm in its quiet strength. For a while they walked without speaking. Then Talia leaned her head against his shoulder, comforted by the familiar scent of his aftershave, cedar and something calming, like home. "Dad," she murmured. "Yes, sweetheart?" She hesitated, her voice low. Why weren't you angrier today? At Officer Reed, at Miss Hawthorne, at the boys, at the whole school? You had every right." Judge Monroe exhaled softly, the kind of breath that held both relief and reflection. "I was angry," he said. "Of course I was. Any father would be. But anger is a fire, Talia. If you hold it too long, it burns you more than the world." She listened, eyes half closed. He continued, "Anger destroys. Truth frees." Talia lifted her head slightly, studying his face. There was no bitterness there, no lingering rage, only the clarity of someone who understood justice in a way few ever did. "Truth frees," she repeated, letting the words settle into her chest. Monroe placed a gentle hand on her back. "You fought with truth today. You didn't shout, you didn't blame, you told your story. And that is what changed everything." A small smile tugged at her lips. "I was scared. You were brave," he corrected. "Courage is fear that stands its ground." She blinked away the last trace of moisture in her eyes. "Do you think things will really change at Crestwood?" "They already have," he said. "Not because of me, because of you." Talia looked away, cheeks warming. "I didn't do it alone." "No," he agreed. "But someone always has to go first." They walked a little farther, the street bathed in the soft glow of streetlights flickering on. Neighbors watered their lawns. A dog barked in the distance. Life felt simple again, in a way she desperately needed. Talia stopped and looked at the sky, streaks of gold melting into twilight. "I guess I won something today," she said quietly. Her father brushed a curl from her face. "You won the hardest battle of all." "What battle?" He smiled. "The battle against fear." A warmth bloomed in her chest. Not relief, not victory, but something deeper, resolve, because she knew this wasn't the end. There would be other schools, other voices, other injustices, but for the first time she felt ready. She squeezed her father's hand. "Let's go home," she whispered. As they walked the final stretch under the soft glow of dusk, one truth echoed louder than the rest. The girl who once walked through a hallway in handcuffs had become the voice that would help others break theirs. A girl nearly silenced by fear had risen as one of the loudest, strongest voices for justice, and she was just getting started. And that's how a girl they tried to silence became the one voice the entire school could no longer ignore. Talia walked out without the cuffs, but the bullies walked out without their lies, stripped of every ounce of fake power they once hid behind. Justice didn't just arrive. It walked right through the front doors wearing her father's nameplate. Now, tell me this. If you were standing in that hallway, would you have spoken up? or stayed silent like everyone else. If this story hit you, make sure to like, share, and subscribe, because more stories exposing the truth are coming, and you won't want to miss what's next.